So good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started. I suspect we will continue to see people joining us for this. I thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for the third of the PSEMA webinars. This is the one in April for supply chain, because April is Supply Chain Awareness Month. See a few faces that we all met a couple weeks ago at the Hurricane Conference. It's great to see Diane and Karen and some others that are joining us after meeting us and hearing Tom and Marianne and I speak at the Hurricane Conference. So appreciate all of you being on. One thing I'd ask is, if you don't mind, if you could just put in the chat your name and the organization contact information if you choose. We do have that, but I always like to just grab one more set of that, and that way too, it's you guys can network with one another. The big thing that PSEMA focuses on is building our network, and how do we all work together during the blue sky, so when something happens, we can know who to call in case we need something. This presentation and this webinar is going to be a tad bit different. So Kathy Fulton, who is with the American Logistics Aid Network, she and I are going to co-chair this conversation along with Tom Serio, but this is a conversation with all of you. We want to hear your feedback, your comments, your thoughts. And so we're going to pose some questions, and Kathy's going to walk through in a second. We're going to use a couple different survey questions for you guys to answer, but we really want this to be interactive, because you are the ones doing the supply chain that are out there. And we want to start thinking about, how do we make more resilient supply chains for our business partners? And so what are those questions you're asking? What should you be asking? Have you thought about what happens if tomorrow you're in Texas and you get hit with a massive ice storm and no one can operate for 2 weeks, and what happens with something like that? So that's what we're looking at for this conversation. I'm going to turn it over just quickly. I should do some housekeeping things. One, we are recording this so we can place it up on the website after the webinar today. Two, love for all of you to join PSEMA. You can go to psema.org for more information on our website about how to join. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. And then we are moving into really creating how we're going to react and interact once something is going on, if there's an incident tomorrow. And so if you have thoughts or comments on that as well, please feel free to reach out to me, and we're building out that team on the technology side as well. And I'm going to turn it over. There are a couple of us from the PSEMA Founders Group. I'll just see if Tom, if you want a quick introduction. I see Marianne's on, and then we'll have Kathy introduce and talk about what's going to happen.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. Tom Serio here, currently in the consulting business, but I'm excited about PSEMA. And we were at the conference a couple of weeks ago, and we are drawing a lot of interest. And mainly because this is run by the private sector, for the private sector. It's run by business for business, not a government program. And that's what really piques the interest of folks. So yeah, join. If you haven't joined, join. If you've got other companies that you think should be part of this, definitely be part of it. You know, having just gone through the flooding here in South Florida the last week, there are so many businesses that were impacted and did not have disaster plans that I'm finding out. So, you know, an organization like this can be very helpful for small and medium-sized businesses and large ones, of course, but we have to understand every business needs to be prepared. So thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Tom. Marianne, you want to say a couple words?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Marianne Adams from General Motors OnStar. And we have had a really great experience so far with PSEMA. After Julie presented the idea to me, we felt that it was very important to expand our network. And I cannot tell you how much I've learned so far from the many people that are participating with PSEMA. And it's just great to interact with a lot of different people so that I can understand disasters better to serve our customers. And today on the call, I'm able to have Emily Jensen from General Motors Supply Chain join us as well. So I'm excited about that. So tgoing you.
Yeah, Emily, welcome. And for those just jumping on before I hand off to Kathy for a few things, is that this is going to be an open conversation. So please, as we go through, if you've got thoughts, jump in. I see Jason McNamara with CNA is also joining us. He's part of the founding group as well. So welcome to everybody. Happy that you guys are here. And I'm going to turn over to Kathy, and we're going to talk about the way we're going to do some questions, and then we'll get into posing some questions and some thoughts. And I'd love all of you to jump in at that point. So Kathy.
Thanks, Julie. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Kathy Fulton, I serve as the Executive Director of American Logistics Aid Network. And like Tom and Marianne, I am also very excited about PSEMA and grateful for the leadership group and all that they are doing to bring content and information so that we all have this foundational level. Like Tom said, there are so many small and medium-sized businesses out there that don't have continuity plans. So anything that this group can do to use our collective knowledge to help improve resilience across communities, I think is just a very good thing. So I want to talk today, or we're going to talk today, not me, because you guys don't want to listen to me for an hour. We're going to talk today about supply chain and how to make your supply chains more resilient, how to talk to your suppliers about their supply chains. So we're going to do, like Julie said, some interactive polling. And we're going to, just to kind of get us started on this, I'm going to bring up a poll here, and you can either join using your QR code, your camera, the QR code on your camera, or you can join by going to the website slido.com and then putting in that code there. And as you do, we'll start to see this update.
If for some reason you don't feel like you fit into one of these, pick where you think you best fit in. And then let us know if we have not captured. These are very broad. So one thing as we've defined what PSEMA looks like, I say to people, private sector, and they say, oh, we have, these groups that are part of our private sector, and they normally will name a contractor or a consulting firm. They're not thinking along the lines of like Pepsi that's represented here and some of these other retail. And so we're breaking it out, that business and industry, and then that consultant and contractor side of the house, where maybe it's you're helping with a disaster, either or preparedness type things as well. So.
Excellent. And I see, let's see, we've got, how many people do we have? So we have 24 people. So we'll just give it one more moment to allow people to respond here. It looks like we've got a pretty decent mix. And Julie, as we always like to see, heavily business and industry. So I think that's terrific. Let's go ahead. And the reason we wanted to ask about this is because how you protect your supply chain is going to be very different depending on what sector you're in, and your role within other people's supply chains. But there are still some fundamental questions that are going to apply regardless of where you are in the supply chain. So yeah, I think we'll go ahead and leave that question. And Julie, I'm going to stop screen sharing if you will bring up kind of the questions that we had talked about.
I will do that now.
Thank you.
1 second.
And feel free, if someone broadly disagrees with kind of what these kind of 5 areas. I know we said 5 questions, but these are definitely more than 5 questions, because if you want to be truly resilient and you want to have a resilient supply chain, it's going to take more than 5 questions, but I think that there are probably 5 really good categories. So I would say that the first thing you want to ask your suppliers about is their own supply chains. How well do they know their supply chains? Do they know where the materials that they are using within what they are providing to you are coming from? What's the raw, where those raw forms coming from? Where's the produce being grown? Where are the rare earth materials being mined? What is that point of origin? Do they know where their production facilities are located? And do they know if something happens at those production facilities, how are they going to be alerted to that? And then in turn, how are they going to share that information with you? So that's kind of the first area that I think, we can talk about as far as, supply chain. So I'm just going to pause there for a second to see if anyone has any comments about how you are asking your suppliers about their supply chains, the physical supply chains.
And I was going to say, we recognize there is some proprietary discussions. And so this can be a very generalized discussion. You don't need to be getting into your specific ones, but a lot of us have a lot of experience and many years in this industry. So kind of that higher level generalization. And at this point, everyone can, just jump in. If you want, you can raise your hand. I'll be happy to call on you as well, but sometimes that can be difficult to see. So just feel free to jump in.
So Kathy, help me out here for a minute. I'm not in the supply chain business right now, but when I was with Office Depot, well, we had a supply chain. But to me, supply chain basically, I guess, is warehouse, transportation, cross dock, things like that. I'm looking at your document here, and it seems like you're including more of the items themselves.
Yeah, so Tom, what you're talking about with warehouse and transportation, cross-docking, those are the logistics components of your supply chain. And this is where I would say the pandemic may have done us a disservice, because we hear the term supply chain in the news all the time, and people think, supply chain, and they think about the things that they can see, when in reality, there's so much behind the scenes. And this is where the other components come into play, right? All of the things that go into delivering a final product to a consumer are part of the supply chain, whether it's the physical product or not. And that's where we're kind of talking about here the physical component of that. But item 2, 3, 4, and 5, labor, technology, risk, and regulatory environment, all of those go into are components of that final product delivery. Does that help?
No, it does help. And it's interesting to see these other components that go into it. I just had a limited education and experience with it, but I see the endpoints are much further out than what I expected. So okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have any folks on here who specialize in information technology. Supply chain means something totally different to information technology folks, because it talks about the development process of the software. And so when there was a big supply chain inject, the SolarWinds problem a few years ago, it was because the delivery of the software was compromised. Well, if you think all the way back to how is that final product delivered, we're still talking about supply chain. We're just talking about it in a cyber world rather than the physical world.
Gotcha. Okay.
Robert, I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if Robert or Emily, I know, or some of the others. I'll give a quick example that I found to be very interesting just a couple of weeks ago. So I grew up in East Texas. My mom saying it's a Friday night. She goes to Subway to pick up dinner for she and my dad, and Subway's closed because of supply chain, because of the ice storm. And Marshall is nowhere near an ice storm. So she goes to Domino's, and it's the same story. And it's the fact that the ice stopped in Tyler, Texas, which is an hour and a half west of us. But maybe that Subway and Domino's should have asked their Cisco or their food, distributor, hey, if something happens west of us, do you have a food distribution to Shreveport? Because Shreveport would have been the next largest hub, and they were okay. And so even thinking through those kind of supply chain questions as a franchisee of a Subway maybe should be asking, as opposed to always thinking about the big events that could be impacting these communities.
So I'll add on here just a little bit. I mean, Tom, I think brings up a good question, and Kathy, and I think it's important though to think about it in the context of it's not an either or problem, it's really a both, right? Because you have to have the transportation, the logistics, the warehousing, all of that has to be in place for materials to supply into the business and to be able to produce the goods and services that go into the community. But at the same time, you also have to have the sourcing, the raw materials, and the manufacturing capability in order to get those goods produced to begin with to load onto the ship. So it's everything from the sourcing of the raw materials to the manufacturing that your upstream suppliers provide. But then also you really have to assess how does it get to you. And, when we think about a lot of things today are manufactured in places like China or Vietnam or other markets outside of the US, a lot of those goods then will go by shipping container over the ocean. And so you got to think about ship availability, port availability. Are the longshoremen on strike, or are they working? And then can the trucks get into the port, or is customs having a bad day and they're searching every truck for everything? Right, all of those things put together can be a real kink in the chain. And so you really have to have observability end to end of that supply chain and know what all the steps are along the way, and then have measurements in place along the way as well, so that as things go wrong upstream, you can be alerted early on and be proactive to downstream impacts that may be requiring you to go to Shreveport instead of to Dallas for your subway.
Exactly. Yeah, Robert, thanks for pointing that out. And I probably did focus a little too heavily and on the, the really far upstream components here. It's just on a conversation prior to getting on this call about some folks who are delivering, who are responsible for a good portion of the calorie delivery, food delivery within the state of Alaska. And they were talking about how the port in Alaska is in disrepair and has been for a long time. But they were also commenting that they're fully reliant on the Port of Tacoma in Washington. Now, the Port of Anchorage and the Port of Tacoma, last time I looked, were both in earthquake risk zones, right? So that's, points of failure that you have to think about. Are there alternatives to? And he listed a few alternatives, none of which could continue to provide the same volume that they would need to continue serving the state. So,
Emily, I see you've raised your hand. Feel free to jump in.
Sure thing. So at GM, I can say we are very knowledgeable on our tier 1 when it comes to our supply chain. It is beyond the tier 1 who our suppliers are doing business with, where things are not as visible. So we are working on initiatives in order to gain visibility to our entire supply chain down to the raw materials. And we do this through surveying our tier 1 suppliers and asking them for who they do business with, down to tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, eventually getting to raw material. And then we map those suppliers. And we're able to then bounce event notifications happening around the world, from natural disasters to a facility fire at one of our manufacturers, and being able to then take a look to see what sort of impact that could have on our supply chain. And then notifying the proper tactical operations teams, our command center teams, to then be the boots on the ground to mitigate those risks or impacts that potentially are happening. So those are all initiatives happening in place. I'm really working to try to get to that raw material visibility, but doing what we can with the data that we have today to be able to mitigate those impacts.
yeah, Emily, thanks for sharing that, because in many ways, the automotive industry has kind of led the way, just because of the way the automotive industry supply chains are set up, and you're dealing with often high dollar materials. But it's a good point. So a lot of our partners in the supply chain world talk about the letter N, tier visibility, meaning having visibility all the way back to that point of origin for those raw materials. And just as Emily described, they want to know that, so they can have that bill of materials rolling all the way through. They know exactly where they are. If any of you have read Yossi Sheffi from MIT, if any of you've read Yossi's book, The Power of Resilience, I think that's the one, or The Resilient Enterprise. He's got several out right now, but he talks about Japan and the triple disaster, earthquake, tsunami, nuclear meltdown, and the impact specifically on the automotive industry. So,
Any other thoughts? And even so we have some government partners on, are there government partners that are asking these questions because you too have supply chains and suppliers that you need to ensure are having these conversations. So I'll just pause for a minute and see if anybody has any other thoughts, and then we can move on to some of the other topics as well. Again, just feel free, unmute, jump in if you have any thoughts, or I know, so Diane is joining us from Bermuda Red Cross. We met Diane at the hurricane conference a couple weeks ago and talking about how Bermuda's an island, and so it's just a different set of supply chain concerns. So, you know, Diane, if you've got thoughts on as well from an NGO standpoint, feel free, please, to weigh in and let us know kind of what your concerns are and what your thoughts are being in an island community.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, listening to everybody, I'm getting educated myself and just hearing this, but imagine being on a 21-mile island, a mile and a half at its widest point, 60,000 people, which you could slot into most of your, you know, baseball stadiums over there. You know, everything is imported in to Bermuda. And, you know, I think I said this, you know, we can get very cocky about, you know, that we're so resilient, that we can handle ourselves, but we have not really been challenged as yet by any major disaster. So it's kind of hard to say, you know, how we would pull it all through, because a lot of the organizations here work in silos, and you have a very strong financial sector here, and a lot of international businesses, and their attitude is, you know, no problem. If something happens, and we'll just go to our overseas branch and they'll, you know, take care of it. Okay, but we're trying to get beyond that and educate people. Okay, let's talk about climate change for a second. You know, if Bermuda is importing everything here, and something happens somewhere in the world in which we get our supplies, what impact that is going to have on us here in Bermuda, out in the Atlantic Ocean, you know, so many thousands of miles away. And it's really hard to get them to focus in on something that's not just here in Bermuda, you know, on a more worldwide or global perspective. Yeah, so it is interesting, and I have very much, I'm a stalker. You know, I have no problem just saying what I think, and I will go to all the various groups. I don't care if it's a private, public, or third sector. It doesn't matter to me. And have difficult conversations and ask difficult questions. But my attitude is also that, you know, we're in this together. And so we really need to think about what if, especially on an island. I didn't say I was successful. I'm just saying I'm pushy. So I don't have a problem doing that, but it gets a little concerning.
So Diane, one of the things that you bring up is kind of the island impact, and what do you do if your organization or your community is cut off from your source of supply, right? So you mentioned, oh, we haven't had a catastrophic event, right? But you do get hurricanes and you get things all of the time in Bermuda, like you're every year, right?
Yeah, we do, and we're pretty resilient. That's the issue right there, because we've been so resilient and been able to get back on our feet very quickly. And when there is a situation, we work well together, and because our focus is let's get it right back to where we were, if not better. So that's great. But even with hurricanes, I mean, Bermuda has never been hit by a 4 or a 5 category, right. You know, so we don't know. We have no idea. And our other islands down south that have been hit and badly hit by 4s and 5s, they've experienced it firsthand. So they take it very seriously. Right. you know, I can go into our
So-
communities here, which I'm in the community all the time, and it'll be 9 a.m. in the morning, and my seniors will say, "Ah, don't worry about that. Come and have a shot of Black Seal or something, you know, and take away all your problems, you know."
Yeah.
So again, it's
so-
that type of mentality.
It's the mentality. Well,
Yeah.
what I was going to say is, you know, we did see catastrophic with Hurricanes Irma and Maria in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, right, in 2017. So from that, FEMA actually commissioned a study about supply chains in these kind of island areas. I was fortunate to work on the National Academies Committee. CNA, Jason's team did a good amount of case study work for that. I'm actually going to drop the link into chat for any of you who are interested. I talk about this report all the time, even though it's at this point 3.5 years old, I guess, but it is still so relevant on the items that they reference about how island areas or areas, anyone really, you don't have to be an island. You know, Salt Lake City will become an island by default because, you know, if Wasatch happens, because they'll be cut off. Thinking about how are you going to support your communities? What is your supply chain? What do your supply chains need to look like if you run into that island kind of situation? So I just dropped that link into chat.
And Kathy, just so that I can be very clear here, Bermuda is also very different from a lot of the Caribbean islands.
Yes. Yes. for certain.
And so again, you have a wealth of businesses here in which the last hurricane that we did have, nobody had to do anything, including the government, because your international sector was calling us saying, our private planes are all ready to go. And what do
Sure.
you need? You know, give us
Yeah.
your shopping list of things.
If
So
we all had that curse of prosperity, right?
I know, but you know, that's also short term thinking, in my opinion, because
Sure.
anything could happen in a second. So yes, we've been blessed, but that could easily change. So
Well-
it's trying to get people's minds beyond that,
Yeah.
and not take it for granted.
Yeah.
It-
Thanks, Diane. I'm sorry, Tom. Julie, I didn't know if you wanted us to move ahead. We're about halfway through, but
Yeah, so Tom can go and then we'll move on to another thought.
I just want to say, you know, Bermuda is different than the other islands. You're right. And when you look at Hurricane Maria and Puerto Rico, you know, Puerto Rico was in a bad way before the storm, and then the storm comes and things are worse. What we can't always be prepared for the worst. Like if you get a Category 5, are things going to blow over? Yes, they are going to. But we have to focus on, and part of PSEMA's mission here is to focus on education and awareness of what to do after things happen. Right? Too many times people are standing around like, okay, what do I do now? And I was down in Fort Lauderdale on Saturday helping some friends try to recover their homes and businesses. But they're all like, you know, Tom, what do we do now? And they're looking at me as a disaster guy to say, can you take charge of this recovery of my office space? So I jumped right in, of course, but I'm looking at like, okay, these folks had no idea what to do. They weren't educated. We can look at that at a business level, a state level, a country level, what have you. So I think, you know, we can't stop a Category 5 from hitting Bermuda. What we can do is educate, make aware, build in the resilience. Hey, it's going to happen. And now what do we do after the fact? And make sure our partners know that we're ready to respond after the fact. I think in Puerto Rico's case, they just weren't ready. I mean, it was just a bad situation that went really, really bad and worse. But I think the fact that we met each other at the conference and you're engaging here. And I hope your engagement here now moves down the line to others that you deal with in Bermuda. But yeah, let's also focus on the awareness and the education, and that's part of PSEMA's mission.
And so I think with that, maybe Kathy, we also talk about not just weather events, right? We've been very focused on what happens when there's a weather event, but there could be cyber, there could be active shooter. Not too long ago on a conference call that I was on, it was with FEMA, and they asked what are their biggest concerns, and the selections were 5 weather events and other. And everybody on the private sector side selected other. And the FEMA team was like, wait, what is other? And what do you mean? And it was all cyber, active shooter, retail theft. And so thinking also through how are you talking about your supply chains, so maybe Kathy talking about like technology side or even the risk environment side, and what are companies thinking through on that?
Well, and Julie, you mentioned labor, and I'll talk about technology and risk in a second, but I don't want to skip over labor, because in the groups that we talk with, the supply chain owners and operators, labor is the number one topic that we talk about and has been for the last 3 years. It's not just the shortage of labor, but labor action. I think it was Robert, you mentioned about the West Coast ports, and we're looking at the longshoreman negotiations happening now, and there have been labor actions even within the past couple of weeks where they've had slowdowns. They've done things, and that's not just affecting the port, it's affecting everyone who's downstream from that supply chain. But you also have these other things you have to think about as you're looking towards your suppliers. How are they monitoring against child labor? I never in my lifetime expected to be having a conversation about child labor in the United States, yet it's all over the news, right? And so as a consumer, it makes me pause to think about, who am I buying products from that are, exploiting child labor, not just overseas, but here. We have the issues of enslavement. We have, putting people at hazard, at risk, because you need the precious materials, unfair labor practices. And then Julie mentioned, active attackers, active shooters, active assailant kind of activities. How are you and how are they protecting their businesses against disgruntled employees? Because that certainly has repercussions further down the line. Julie, I'm actually going to roll through the rest of these just very quickly and then open it back up for conversation. So technology, I spent the first half of my career in the technology world. We lost our slide, Julie.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I thought you were going to, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to share your the question.
No,
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
All good.
So, I spent the first half of my career working in the technology sector. I was responsible for business continuity, which when I was doing it only meant IT business continuity, right? So I think a lot of the concepts that we're seeing for regular business, ongoing business continuity and supply chain continuity do come out of those practices. But even things like, how are they training their employees? How are they preventing phishing or man in the middle or other types of attacks? What is their policy regarding ransomware? Are they paying the ransom? How are they reporting it? What are they doing with these cyber attacks? And these are conversations that you have to worry about, because they're going to have access to your data, right? If they're manufacturing for you, or if they're supplying to you, they have information about your supply chain. And oh, by the way, if they're attacking one of your suppliers, you're probably next on the list. And then we kind of get into these last two categories, where just looking at the overall risk environment. And some of this, you can ask the 3 category questions above about supply chain, about labor, and about technology. But if that organization does not have a holistic risk program, if they're not looking at things beyond those 3 categories, if they're not looking at the weather events, right, or other things like that, then they're probably not protected. They don't necessarily have to have someone dedicated to risk management or business continuity, but they do need to be thinking about it and planning for it. And then regulatory is something, it's probably number 2 on the list. When we talk with supply chain owners and operators, labor is definitely number 1. Regulatory environment is number 2. And so what are they doing? How are they monitoring and engaging regulatory action? How are they ensuring that they're going to be able to continue producing the items that they're providing to you, or the services or whatever that they're providing to you. So I'm going to pause there and we can have more of a conversation before we move into any other questions that we have for you.
We'll open it up. Does anybody have thoughts? I see a variety of people. I see Karen with Insperity. I don't want to put anybody on, feel free to jump in, or if you have thoughts on any of these, the risk side, Jason, I know you guys do a lot on the supply chain at CNA, if you've got some thoughts there as well, but we'll just open it up if anybody wants to weigh in on these conversations. Emily and Robert as well that have already spoken. I mean, feel free.
So just, I more have a question for the folks, and maybe it'll help them kind of form their answers. Like, all this stuff costs money, and it obviously is not, not just a nice to do. It's an investment that you have to make. And I guess the question I would have for you folks is kind of where this falls in your priority list, and how difficult or how easy it is to get there. And I'll just use a quick example. This is kind of more of a government example, but I mean, we saw our folks, Kathy, myself, and some other folks that were kind of looking in the kind of January, February timeframe of COVID, January 2020, February 2020. We saw it wouldn't even be a tidal wave, because that would mean things were coming. It was more like low tide of epic proportions. We saw that a lot of the medical supplies were just not going to show up. So when it came time for us to deal with COVID, that was going to be an additional problem. We tried to get that out there through government channels, but I guess, I use that example in terms of, okay, yeah, we know that stuff is going to happen, but we're only willing to invest X amount of dollars in preparing for that. And so I'll just add that as kind of a side question to get people thinking.
So I think that's a great question, Jason. And I think I would answer it in a couple of ways. I think in terms of, this is more of a long-term strategic issue rather than a tactical, hey, for these 6 months, we're going to take a certain set of actions, right? And so I think the way that I've approached it in organizations that I've been with or supported is that looking at it from a perspective of, they're only going to take action if they feel uncomfortable with where they're at, right? So the human action model. And so when they feel a little uncomfortable about that moment of supply chain uncertainty, or supplies making it into the marketplace, right, to support manufacturing operations or delivery, then it becomes an opportunity to go to executive management and say, hey, what about dual sourcing some of these materials? Or what about bringing on another supplier in another country? Instead of relying solely on China, maybe we should have some manufacturing in Vietnam or in Cambodia, or a place that can support that and give us some diversity. And over a period of time, you can build some diversity in terms of what your supply chain looks like. But agreed, it's not an instant on kind of, well, let's bring on another supplier. And I think if you look at Apple as an example in the marketplace, right, they've manufactured a great number of their products in China for a long time. And I think they've gotten stung a little bit by that in terms of some of the availability with of manufacturing plants to operate with the shutdown of the Foxconn plants and all of the COVID things, right? And they're slowly building out additional supply chain builders and suppliers in other parts of the world that enable them to be able to continue to manufacture and deliver under different circumstances. And I think that's probably the best approach, because like you said, it's all about money. And until the money is available, right, that you can't make a change. And so small incremental changes over time makes for that bigger change that you need to see at an enterprise level.
Thanks, Robert. And Emily, I know you have a comment. I'm going to pop up just a poll for the audience here on where business or supplier continuity fits within everyone's priority list. So thanks for that question, Jason. And while Emily's talking, we can just fill that out.
Yes, so I think, Kathy, you may have mentioned it. In 2011, there was an earthquake and a tsunami in Japan. And as a result of that, that honestly was the starting point for GM supply chain to develop a supply chain risk management team. And beyond that, you can imagine the effects that COVID had on GM and our supply chain. So really, it's been, since COVID that we are now, supply chain resiliency is a priority. We are dedicating IT resources towards any sort of supply chain resiliency efforts. And beyond that, it's not only just become a priority, but more of a culture that we've had within our company, a culture shift towards it. And that has all helped us to be able to drive those initiatives forward and dedicate the necessary resources to execute them.
Yeah, so yours was something bad happened, and so we responded.
Exactly. And sometimes it takes the crisis and chaos to, really shake things up and turn them for the better.
And Emily, I agree with you 100%, because that's the attitude, why the attitude is the way it is here in Bermuda, is because we have not had something that we haven't been able to bounce back on, right? And so it's really challenging to go into your communities to try and get them to focus in on something that most of them say, hey, I'm 86 years old, and I've never had any of this stuff happen to me. So I'll be dead and buried, and then it's up to my kids to worry about it. It's just that little cockiness of, because it hasn't happened to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so true. It's, it's that mindset of, we got shifted to it's when it happens, not if it happens.
Precisely. And so that's, everything that I do is the preparedness side of things. And you tell somebody they're fat and ugly long enough, they're going to start to believe it. You're hoping anyway. And that's what you just have to be. You have to be very consistent with your message, and you've got to go to every sector, whether it be the public, private, your governments, no matter what. You just have to keep going with this message, and it's not sexy work, and it can be very frustrating. But
Diane, I'm not sure if I feel attacked. You're calling us fat and ugly, but
no.
I'm kidding. No, it's your point is really well taken. I would love just I'm kind of sharing the results here, but we've only had 4 of the 28 people on the webinar.
I didn't see it, Kathy.
What's that?
Hold on.
We didn't see
I
it.
can't.
I didn't
There.
see it either.
There you go.
Okay,
Ah, there it is.
Sorry.
There it is.
Okay, that's
Got it.
why, Kath, because I didn't
Oh.
see that either.
Okay.
Kathy, while
So
we're filling that out, let me throw 2 recent examples. I mentioned about the Florida flooding we had down here. Do you know that today we are having a gas crisis in Southeast Florida? Because it's crazy, but because of the floods we had last week, we had an impact to transportation, getting tankers on the road. But also, I found out today is that part of the terminal at the port is inoperable, which is reducing the shipment of gasoline to gas stations. So here in Southeast Florida, we have people waiting online to get gas at the local stations. My 2 local stations are actually closed now because they don't fuel. I was up in Fort Pierce this morning, about an hour and a half north of here, and there's no issue. They've got all the fuel they want. So sometimes it's these surprise situations that we look at. Conversely, there can be impact to supply chain because there's no need anymore for a product. Case in point, Bud Light. Okay. Bud Light went on a marketing campaign with the woke gender. I don't know what else to call it, but people, and they put somebody, a transgender person, on the cans of Bud Light. And now everybody's protesting and not drinking it and not ordering it anymore. So now you got supply chain that says, I've got supply, but no place to put it. Now what do I do? So, and that's kind of goes the other way is okay, we've got product, but nobody wants a product. What's the impact to supply chain? Yeah, it's an impact to business. It's an impact to the truckers, impact to the storage people, the warehouses. So, you've got to look, these things pop up left and right. We always write the book about, like government, like FEMA says, oh, it's always about the weather. we look at active shooter and everything else, but now we have to start looking at these little pockets of impacts and pockets of risk to say, okay, what's going to happen here? What else is out there that could impact my operation?
So Jason, oh yeah, you got your hand up there. I was gonna
Just quickly, I just want to share pain with you guys. So the short story is the government, and I've spent a lot of time in government. Government is really no better with respect to making decisions until something is, 3 feet, 2 inches in front of their face, and actually doing something about it. I know that's not a surprise to most of you, but there is. I think it kind of falls on what Diane said, which is you do need to be ready for those opportunities. So when your supplier goes sideways and you're not getting something from a particular country, or there's a particular critical material that you're not receiving, that you're able to go to your management and your board and say, this is why we need X, Y, and Z. And that exact same thing happens at the federal level. The only time I ever passed meaningful legislation was in the immediate aftermath of a large disaster, because that's when the opportunity arises and that's when people are listening to you. So I just give you a little bit of hope. Just keep that stuff in your top drawer and be ready to pull it out when the time comes.
So thank you, Jason. And I'm sure that you passed other meaningful legislation. Your career in government is not all lost, but I'm going to actually drop into chat here. Since Tom mentioned the ways in which supply chains can be disrupted, they can be affected by a demand shift because people are either buying a whole lot more because a disaster has occurred, or a whole lot less because they don't agree with the politics of an organization. Within the National Academy's report, it talks about the different types of ways in which supply chains can be affected, but there's also a newer research report released last year. And if you're super nerdy and like reading this kind of stuff, 3 of the authors from that National Academy's report have done some further research on enhancing supply chain resilience. And they talk in more depth about ways in which supply chains are affected and things that we can do to enhance resilience in the face of different types of disruptions. So
I just want to say one thing, sorry,
Julie.
Kathy, to Emily's point, when she was talking about the tsunami earthquake event in Japan and how automakers had to think through, we always said that in emergency management, you never waste a disaster, right? You come up with what is the best practice. And to be honest, it was Hurricane Ida and me kind of observing private sector interaction. It's how PSEMA was created now a little over a year ago. And Diane asked at the Hurricane Conference, why another organization? There's so much alphabet soup out there. And it's because we want to have these conversations. We want the private partners to come together, business and industry. Let's talk about these now so that we can start to plan now and then know what we need to do should an event happen and an incident happen. And so again, kind of Emily's point, don't waste a disaster to come up with how we fix things on the front end. So, and Kathy, we've got about 10 more minutes. So I don't know. I know we have probably, I think, one more question, and then maybe we can kind of go with some discussion from that. And I'm just going to leave this up right now.
Okay. Yep. And I'm going to, because it has come up a couple of times, GM supply chain, and Yossi Sheffi does reference the GM changes within his Power of Resilience book. So I dropped that link in there. I see Rich has put something in chat. Rich, Richard Celine, you want to talk about that before we go to our last question?
Well, I'll just summarize because it's been captured not only in this call, but a lot of calls that we've all participated in. HEB grocers, Walmart, Costco, you name it, know exactly where pallet number 563 on truck 1112 will arrive at 5:37 p.m. precisely at which warehouse and which space in that warehouse. In addition to the warehousing, they all keep a certain amount of their floor space completely empty for just-in-time scenarios to hold inventories. That is not how FEMA works. It's not how counties work. Counties, matter of fact, God love them, will tell us that they know exactly where every asset is, and they don't. They don't know that. That's just sad when we have all of the technology and capabilities to align what business and industry does to look at its inventory management, which is a part of the supply chain. Second quick observation is, I was on a call that now is no longer confidential with an aerial photo of Newark Airport, the highways, the pipelines, the fiber optics, the railroad, and the port, all within about a 10-mile line. And we all appropriately believe from an economic development perspective that having that kind of concentration is actually a benefit. And now what's become very, very clear is, because it's gone down twice, including the Colonial Pipeline attack, is that we have bottlenecks that are actually no longer to our advantage, which leads me to the third observation, and that is that one of the roles that I think PSEMA and all of you on this call can begin to take a look at is that when we couldn't get PPE for any of us because we were stuck in realizing everything was offshore, if you all remember, between community colleges, local manufacturers, and others, these ideas of these distributed hyper-local supply chains and logistics are, I think, more of a true industry community partnership that we've got to look at and find ways to drive resources and development that way. Those are just three quick observations I wanted to share.
Yeah, Richard, such a great point about the concentrations becoming bottlenecks. Supply chains are definitely organized to be in concentrated in areas because you can get access to labor, and it becomes, drives down your cost of infrastructure if you put a lot of things together. I live in Central Florida, where we have a huge logistics hub, because we can get to a lot of places in the state in an easy drive. But at time of disaster, it becomes a bottleneck, right? And to your point about the decentralized modality, or the decentralized model, Amazon with their fulfillment center concept and others with their micro center concepts have started to figure that out. So interesting observations. Julie, I'm going to go to our last question here about when do you talk with your suppliers about their business continuity plans? And can you see that this time?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
we're good. For some of you, this question may also be in a contracting, not necessarily an RFP. Could be a contracting phase. It could be, before that initial interaction. And this question really came from some discussions that I had with Justin with HEB, who talks about how, big companies will ask, and maybe it's a form that gets a box that gets checked, but are there more detailed questions then about the supplier's supply, right? So is there real conversations about what do they do as a backup if they have no power, or there's a boil water, or the roads are shut down? And I think Texas figured out a lot of those conversations because of the ice storm that, Texas is not used to an ice storm shutting things down for 10 days. And so asking the questions of where it was going to come from, if it couldn't come from the normal locations, is really kind of where we're looking at.
So I'm glad to see a lot of people saying, it's in our RFP, but it just changed in an equal number of people, which is only 3 of each are saying that you're not really sure when you're asking about that, or if you are asking about it. I'm surprised that with, no one is mentioning, like, in our quarterly business review, we're talking about this with them. So I'm sorry, Julie, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I want to be respectful of time. I mean, people are welcome. We'll continue the discussion. What Kathy and I wanted to do with this was to start the initial conversations with everyone, to think about what kind of conversations are you having if you are a government partner. I see that we have, a couple federal friends and state friends on. Are you asking your business partners in your states or in your regions what their plans are? In the event that you could be working with that local grocery store chain, the Albertsons or the HEBs or Myers or whatever it is, if you need water because of a more localized event. So it's just really opening the conversations up. It doesn't have to be specifically to our retail and business industry friends on here about these conversations. I'm just going to open it up for a few minutes. If anyone has any kind of thoughts, comments, what you think we should have been asking, what you would like us to talk about before we get closer to that top of the hour. And just jump in if you have stuff.
Oh yeah, thank you, Julie. That reminds me, I think we do have a question that asks that, don't we? Sorry, I'll bring
good.
that one up.
You're good.
Julie, I think it's a good point where businesses should be checking with other businesses to see if they have disaster plans in place. I know organizations I've been with have been doing that. They're saying we will not do business with you unless you have some sort of contingency plan. And not the fact that I want to see your plan, because I'm not going to understand your plan. I want to see an executive summary. So if we have to go to court one day, that you can prove that you have plans in place, or you said that you have plans in place.
So what types of questions are you asking your suppliers? And Richard says, getting written into insurance policies. That's great.
To be announced.
After COVID, which almost sunk the not national, but global reinsurance industry because of the definition about pandemics in the business continuity coverage, you're beginning to see the emergence of a requirement that you have to show your business continuity plan, and even in certain circumstances, how you're investing in it for requirements of coverage. Some are beginning to look at it as a means of an incentive or a discount pending. So I think it's beginning to catch up with the significant amount of losses that occurred. So when we talk with suppliers and folks that are on this call, I think we're going to be able to see that there's a little bit of a carrot and stick that's emerging here.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good one for sure, because it definitely motivates action on the part of corporations when there's dollars to be saved on their premiums.
So if I can just make a comment, I'm on the receiving end of quite a few of those requests asking if you have business continuity, disaster recovery plans. And this is just my opinion, but a lot of times I feel like they don't even understand the questions that they're asking from a small business perspective. So I don't know. I mean, we have taken the approach of, we try and help educate them the best we can, but that would take a whole department to do. So, I feel like somebody said, provide a copy of the business continuity plan. Well, in my organization, I have quite a few business continuity plans. We have a one-page statement of recoverability that quite a few of our clients will take and suffice to meet that requirement during the RFP process, which I think is highly valuable. And, we've even changed language a little in that to kind of minimize the amount of additional question requests we are getting. So just food for thought I wanted to add.
So that actually is a perfect lead in too, Karen, on a couple quick things. So we are focused on that small business, medium-sized business as an association and developing these kind of plans, these continuity documents that they could fill in and have that are not 40 pages. I say small businesses don't have the time or resources to do a really, that long of a plan. And so how do we do that? We also had a conversation with the Small Business Administration, and they're wanting to partner with PSEMA because they're building out a resilience program. And so how do we work with them when they're in their communities and saying, this is what the resources are and how to think through those. And so, that leads into the whole thing we've been talking about, small and medium-sized businesses as well. And those small businesses could be a supplier for a larger company. It doesn't always mean that big companies are the suppliers to those other large companies. So I appreciate that. Now we're at the top of the hour, and I've gotten a few notes that some people have had to drop off. Kathy, you have any kind of last comments or thoughts? And then I'll just do a quick wrap up. And
no, other than thank you guys for sharing your experiences. I think that there's no wrong, well, there are plenty of wrong ways to do this, but just do something, right? Just at least get started down this path of figuring out how to protect your supply chain. So that's all. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah. So next month is going to be on business and preparedness. So I think this is actually a perfect conversation to lead into how do we help businesses of all sizes prepare. If you're interested in participating and speaking, or if you have resources, please send them over to us. We will most likely do something similar to this again next month, where we'll present some of those resources, but really talking about how do we help businesses prepare outside of just weather events as well, and outside of hurricane season. Yes, we are doing it in May. It is hurricane season's a month away from at that point, but we want to focus on the broader spectrum as well. So if anyone has any thoughts or comments, please feel reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing everyone in a month, and looking forward to working with all of you as we move PSEMA along. So thanks for being on the call today. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, happy to stay on, or just feel free to reach out directly to me as well.